are outside, not inside the wall. They're outside, so anyone who's working there is also effectively working outside the wall. If they want to come back in, they themselves need to do a quarantine.
That means the city will continue with its strict mandatory quarantine regime. Most arrivals have to undergo between 14 and 21 days of quarantine, one of the strictest in the world. There have been a few exemptions. Diplomats, business leaders and some mainlanders with Hong Kong resident cards have been able to skip quarantine or isolate at home. But not any longer from November 12th. The European Union in Hong Kong has welcomed the city's moves to reopen its borders with China, but also stressed that reopening its borders to global travelers is equally important. Meantime, the US consulate is also calling on the Hong Kong government to come up with a roadmap for global travelers. Roland Lim, CNA, Hong Kong.
2 foreign athletes have tested positive for COVID-19 during test events for the Beijing Winter Olympics. Officials say both are of the same nationality and playing the same sport. They have been transferred to quarantine hotels. China is struggling to contain local outbreaks with the Winter Games just 100 days away. Beijing continues to adopt a zero-tolerance approach against COVID-19, even as other nations lift coronavirus restrictions. Japan is planning for a COVID-19 resurgence this winter. Hospitals will boost bed capacity by about 30%. Plans are also underway to bolster in-home care. Data will be collected to predict which hospitals will come under pressure. About 1.6 million courses of the COVID-19 antiviral pill Molnupiravir have also been purchased. Japan is already preparing to administer booster shots from next month. And Pamela is back in a moment with your Asia Business Update, including Singapore Airlines ready to cope with increased travel demand. And later, Vietnam's coastal communities doing their part in restoring mangrove forests.
This Saturday, why the Singapore property market continues to defy gravity from pandemic to endemic.
Most of the people are not selling first, they want to buy first.
And what lies ahead for the way we work and play.
There is a demand to come back to the office.
Is what tenant mix would actually create the best experience for your consumers.
Money Mind, Saturday at 10:30 p.m.
I'm Fakafaz. All my data is online. What if I got hacked?
Alam na niya pamihak kami tanaman kami, imbal lang kami ala naman nito, pasal iyan ang katanaman kami.
A citizenship law has now left millions, mostly Muslims, potentially stateless.
Southeast Asia was once home to some of the world's greatest empires.
I think it's time for the revolution.
The artists sought to capture not just their struggles, but their hopes and aspirations.
Many of the farmers think the Amazon shouldn't exist.
Was I being irresponsible by staying on?
It's one of my toughest times in my life.
It's surreal. Everything is wrong.
완전히 사라질 뻔했는데
전 지금도 의심하고 있습니다.
อาหารถูกอาหารแพงเนี่ยมันไม่ได้เป็นเรื่องสำคัญที่สุดคือเรื่องของรสชาติ
社会を変えていきましょう
This November, unravel the two sides of a coin as we tackle the complexities of life. For individuals in battling the loneliness of the pandemic, will they emerge stronger from their altered lives? Do young offenders deserve a second chance? Follow the selfless duties of the officers inside the probation service. From trendy to tradition, celebrate the new season of exceptional artistry and architecture in Remarkable Living this November on CMA.
Can your investments have a positive impact on the world? From financing hospitals to funding clean energy, to make electricity more accessible, and investing in innovative solutions to clean polluted marine habitats. Our sustainable investments benefit you and parts of the world that need it most. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
A centuries-old history gives us an understanding of where China's future lies. I'm Olivia Xiong, CNA, Beijing.
You're watching Asia Now here on CNA, and it's time for your business update with Pamela.
Thanks, Alekia. Inflation fear is boosting the U.S. dollar to its highest in more than a year. The greenback is set for its best week since June against the major currencies on bets that the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates earlier than pledged. Such expectations are rising after recent data showing that U.S. inflation hit a 31-year high last month. The dollar index, which measures the greenback against 6 peers, hit a fresh 16-month high of 95.190, and that would put it on track for a 1% gain this week, the most since June. The euro slipped back to a 16-month low at 1.145. OPEC has cut its world oil demand forecast for the last quarter of this year as high energy prices curb the recovery from COVID-19. OPEC expects oil demand to average around 100 million barrels per day in the fourth quarter, down from last month's forecast. The year's demand growth forecast was trimmed to around 5.7 million barrels per day. The cartel has blamed the elevated energy prices and slower demand in China and India for the downward revision. Oil has risen to a 3-year high above the $86 mark this year as OPEC Plus only gradually ramps up supplies and demand rises. Meanwhile, prices of natural gas, power, and coal prices have also soared. OPEC now sees world consumption surpassing the 100 million barrels per day mark in the third quarter of next year. Oil futures reacting to that report. Brent is down by nearly 0.8% and WTI trading just below $81 a barrel. Singapore Airlines says it's prepared to take on any demand increase as it expects market conditions to improve, and that is thanks to rising vaccination rates and travel lane arrangements. 79% of its fleet is ready to go, and the vast majority of its pilots and cabin crew are standing by. SIA's CEO says the carrier is now operating at 37% of pre-COVID capacity, and it is comfortable with ramping that up to 43% in December to meet international holiday travel demand. The flag carrier's second quarter loss narrowed due to cost-cutting, record cargo revenue, and a rise in passenger numbers from a low base. Net loss for the 3 months to September was $427 million, while revenue doubled to $1.5 billion. It says ongoing supply chain disruptions are helping drive air freight demand. Monthly operating cash flows have also come close to break even. Distressed Malaysian carrier AirAsiaX has been given a new lease on life. Creditors have reportedly approved a debt restructure that could see the airline start with a clean slate, but only after a substantial write-down of its liabilities. Reports say creditors, including Airbus, BOC Aviation, and Rolls-Royce, have agreed to accept payment of just 0.5% of more than $8 billion they're owed. They've also agreed to terminate all existing contracts. AirAsiaX, the long-haul sister company of the discount carrier AirAsia, last month said it faced liquidation if creditors did not agree to the plan. And as part of the latest deal, Airbus has agreed to reduce AirAsiaX's existing aircraft orders for around 78 wide-body jets. The restructure may help the airline avoid being delisted from the Malaysian Stock Exchange, its shares surging 25% on the outcome, and AirAsia Group also getting a lift of 1.8%. Some 40,000 security officers in Singapore are set to get better pay and working conditions in the coming years. The monthly gross wage of an entry-level employee is expected to rise from about 2,200 Singapore dollars in 2022 to more than 3,500 in 2028. It's part of new recommendations under the progressive wage model for the industry. To better safeguard welfare, security officers can only work a maximum of 72 hours a month in overtime hours. This will be enforced by the Police Licensing and Regulatory Department. The Security Tripartite Cluster is also pushing for tech adoption and skills upgrading to improve the industry. It says this is especially important amid the pandemic when more security officers are needed for COVID-19 safe management measures. The government has accepted the recommendations. Taking a look at Japanese shares, they ended the session higher as investors scooped up battered stocks. Investors buying into a domestic market that has lagged behind a global rally amid concerns about the impact of rising costs on corporate earnings. The Nikkei closed 1% higher, but shares of Toshiba fell by more than 1.3%. A company commission report said that its executives, including its former CEO, behaved unethically, albeit not illegally, with respect to allegations that management sought to pressure overseas shareholders. And elsewhere in Asia, South Korea's Kospi finished the session 1.5% higher thanks to a boost in consumer sentiment stemming from China's Singles' Day sales, and the TAIEX advanced 0.4%. China's annual Singles' Day shopping spree has ended with little fanfare this year amid the sustained global supply chain crunch. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba recorded around $85 billion in orders over its 11-day sales event, marking a roughly 14% increase from the year before. The sales increase comes as overall consumption in China slows and caps a relatively muted version of a sales festival that Alibaba once aggressively promoted. The e-commerce giant has toned down the marketing hype amid ongoing regulatory tightening from Chinese authorities, saying its focus was on sustainable growth this year. Meanwhile, its smaller rival JD.com has wrapped up around $55 billion in sales across its platforms, up 28% compared to a year ago.
从数据上来看呢，今年的双十一的增速呢是相当好的。那这个背后呢，我们认为的原因就是消费者的消费诉求还在，但是就像您所判断的，他们会更加理性了，就是一定要有一个明确的理由，让他们愿意为这个商品或这个服务去买单。
Checking those company shares, Alibaba is down by 1.4% and JD.com jumping nearly 5%. And that is the latest in business. Back to you, Alekia.
Mangrove forests are rapidly declining in Vietnam, and it's due to both climate change and overexploitation. But some coastal communities are now working to restore and preserve these vital ecosystems. Tung No reports.
Thriving in areas between the land and the sea, mangrove forests play a vital role in mitigating the impacts of climate change. They store more carbon in their roots and soil than any other kinds of forests. They trap sediments and pollutants and act as storm barriers. They also serve as sanctuaries and nurseries for marine life, mammals and birds.
Nhờ có hệ sinh thái rừng ngập mặn thì mới tạo ra cái môi trường đa dạng sinh học cho rất nhiều loài chim di cư, những cái loài chim quý mà nhờ có gọi là những cái bãi bồi của chúng ta thì những cái loài chim di cư này có thể bay từ Lào hay là bay từ Nhật hay từ Hàn Quốc hay là Úc, nó có một cái chỗ đậu và là nó có một cái chỗ nơi để sinh sản, thì đấy cũng là một cái giá trị sinh thái rất là lớn.
But in Vietnam, vast swathes of mangrove forests have been lost in the last few decades, and climate change is only one of several culprits. Vietnam is now the third largest exporter of fishery products in the world, but the expansion of its aquaculture sector has come at the expense of mangrove forests and their biodiversity. Many have been cut down to make way for shrimp and fish farms, which also pollute coastal ecosystem with fertilizer and antibiotic waste.
phát triển kinh tế xã hội thì cũng tạo nên những cái áp lực rất là lớn vào cái diện tích sử dụng ngập mặn, bởi vì chúng ta thấy là nhu cầu về phát triển nuôi trồng thủy hải sản thì có thể nâng cao những cái giá trị xuất khẩu của Việt Nam sang thị trường quốc tế, cũng như là những nhu cầu với cái số lượng dân số ngày càng tăng thì nhu cầu về đất ở, rồi về những cái diện tích trồng trọt hay là những cái diện tích mà có thể xây dựng những cái khu cảng tại Việt Nam để phát triển cho kinh tế thì cũng tạo ra những cái sức ép không nhỏ đối với cả rừng mặn Việt Nam của chúng ta.
Some coastal communities in Vietnam are now trying to reverse this damage. Southern Cà Mau province is home to the country's largest mangrove forests, and farmers here have been planting young trees since 2018 to restore the mangrove stands they've lost. With technical and financial support from international donors, such as the United Nations Development Programme, local farmers are provided with young trees to plant in designated mangrove areas. They are also trained in organic production techniques to sustainably cultivate shrimps and crabs in these areas. The products of these techniques help support livelihoods and protect mangrove forests at the same time.
Nuôi tôm sinh thái thì nó có mấy cái lợi hơn cái nuôi tôm thông thường, là một là được cái hỗ trợ con giống hàng năm. Cái thứ hai nữa là nó kết hợp hài hòa với rừng tôm. Vậy thì thực hiện cái quy định tỷ lệ rừng với tỷ lệ tôm thì 6 rừng 4 tôm, cho nên sau này khi 12-13 năm sau thì khai thác rừng đó nó thu nhập được cũng một số tiền đáng kể. Cái giá bán nó cao hơn cái giá tôm thông thường. 1 ký được cao hơn được 5.000.
Analysts say one of the key challenges now is protecting these restored habitats. Some previous effort failed because the planted trees die well before they could grow into forests. To address this, the restored mangroves have been incorporated into the government's national program for forest preservation, giving them a higher level of protection. Vietnam's struggle to maintain its mangrove forests is typical for countries in Southeast Asia, which has lost a third of its mangroves in the last 40 years. It underscores the need to strike a balance between economic development and conservation of its biodiversity. Cà Mau's integration of aquaculture zones with mangrove forests is a unique response to that need, and one that could have an impact far beyond its shores. Tùng Ngô, CNA, Hà Nội.
And that's Asia Now for this hour. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter.
Dialect is part of our life, so you will remember where your family comes from.
I'm hoping that through food I'm able to share more about my history and my culture. Teaching my uncle expert. Yeah! Grouper! Wow!
Happy anniversary!
Happy anniversary, sayang.
Are you excited about today?
I am.
I feel guilty because I don't want to hold him back from any other version of happiness he might be able to have.
Enjoy a special journey through time in Gangnam. Join Justin and a historical commentator as they explore classical attractions and learn how life was like in ancient Korea, and find out why some traditions and cultures are still in fashion. Gangnam Insiders Picks, Sunday on CMA. This program is brought to you by the Gangnam-gu office.
Radio